Welcome back to another episode of Broke Up, Not Broken. I'm your host, Jamie Lima, and founder of Allegiant Divorce Solutions, where we help people prepare for, navigate, and recover financially from divorce. This podcast is your one-stop shop for mastering your life and your finances throughout the entire divorce process. Today, I'm joined by Darren Elliott. Darren brings both clinical expertise and lived experience to this conversation, having survived narcissistic abuse and navigating a life with ADHD. He specializes in helping individuals and couples work through disconnection, especially in high conflict relationships. Today, we're going to dive into the psychological dynamics of divorce, especially when narcissism is in play, and how these dynamics can impact financial clarity, boundaries, and long-term planning. So grab a cup of coffee or your beverage of choice, buckle up, and let's once again get you personally and financially empowered. Darren, so great to have you with us today, man.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I'm excited to be here with you.
Yeah, well, we've got a lot to talk about because, like I said in our pregame here for this conversation, we work with a lot of people who are trying to navigate the financial aspects of divorce and are having a very hard time doing it, not only psychologically, but financially because of narcissism that's involved. And I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and share a little bit about the work that you do. But I want to also focus on that word narcissism because we hear it a lot in the work that we do. And I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a therapist. So I have a little bit of experience, on the psychological aspect of things, but I'm not a pro like you. And a lot of people use that word incorrectly. So I want to make sure we talk a little bit about that, make sure that we're not just throwing this word out just randomly. We actually are using it in the right context. So why don't you share a little bit about the work that you do and we can go from there.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, the word narcissist is thrown around it's thrown around like an insult today. So it's used very widely, and it's also quite misunderstood. It is usually used as an insult, but there's certain traits that people assume to be narcissism that may or may not be narcissism. And people behave in different ways when they're in different emotional states. But I want to mention, if you have a narcissistic partner, it is highly advisable to seek a solution like yours, to have a third party in charge of analyzing the financials, because that is the kind of thing you do need when you're divorcing someone who's narcissistic, because they have a narrative, and their narrative is the true narrative, and they need to be right and you to be wrong. And that's one of the things that you can usurp is, instead of me being right and you being wrong, we have Jamie come in and he's doing the finances and we both just trust Amy. So it's not something we have to fight about. It's not something we have to disagree on. We're bringing in a third party to deal with our finances and to sort it out. That makes it so much easier, but it's so important.
Because the maths, right? I mean, 2 + 2 is 4, and who's going to argue about that, right?
Right. So you're taking away a lot of the conflict, because there's a lot of conflict around finances, as you very well know. And there's different opinions about it. And the thing with someone who's narcissistic, if they truly are, they're right and you're wrong when it comes to their partner. So they need to be right and they need their partner to be wrong. But they might be fine with you being right, Jamie. So if you put you in the one who's giving them the financial numbers and stuff, it makes it easier for both of them, in fact, because there's a narrative there.
I've seen that come into play a few times. I mean, just because, we do two things. One, we do mediation, where we help, people come to, an agreement and try to do so amicably. And then we also work as an advocate. So we basically be on Team Darren, right? And when we're on Team Darren, it's easy. I could see where it'd be easier for the other party to think that, we're just, we're biased and what have you. But with the reporting that we do and the analysis that we run, and just being able to show them the facts, like, hey, here's the math behind what we're proposing, and this is why. It's often hard to argue that, and I think it like you said, it helps to stifle some of that angst, anger, that's bubbling underneath the surface.
Well, it'll help them deal with their polarized responses as well. Because someone who's dealing with narcissism tends to have a yes, right, good, bad response, and also a win-lose. And that's where it goes really wrong in a divorce, is I need to win and I need them to lose. So in this case where it's right and wrong, you bring in the right. So it's sort of giving them a polarized, well, this is correct, and they can go with correct. So you're not going to the polarized response of me versus you. I win and you lose. I'm good and you're bad. So that's super helpful. To to let them feel like they're winning is part of the work as well, to recognize I'm helping you both here. Because that's really important. They need to feel like they're winning. And if they don't feel like they're winning, they're going to attack. So I would imagine part of your work is like, this is how we come up with a really fair thing, and we're not going to make a mistake, and you're not going to be cheated. Because they also have a feeling like they're being cheated. You're trying to cheat me. So they're going to try to cheat you first. So if you're giving them clarification that no one's going to be cheated here because I'm taking care of the numbers in a systemic way, and numbers are numbers, then that feeling of everyone's trying to cheat me, that can be dealt with. So you're actually giving them narcissistic management tactics just by being there with your service.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. You should be in my next commercial.
Right. It takes a lot of management. It takes a lot of, because fairness is one of the things that they really get upset about. And they really do have the feeling like everyone's taking advantage of me when they get into that triggered position. So managing
100%.
that is very, very important. And they will not be able to manage it from their partner because their partner is considered on the other team. Yeah, but you can be on their team, as you rightly acknowledge. And that's
100%.
what happens in therapy, too. I'm on both of their team, and they're able to feel that I'm on both of their team. That's how the work is possible. It's developing trust with someone who doesn't trust easily.
So let's talk about that a little bit. There's I on my side see a lot of like financial abuse, financial manipulation, so on and so forth. And it's really hard to get any real financial clarity on what is fair and what is just and what is equitable in a divorce when there's so much of that going on. And I presume you see that in the work that you do as well, in that that interaction between the spouses and in the work that you do. So for those that are out there that are victims of this and are starting to think through like, all right, I need to gather all my financial information. I need to make sure I'm going to get what's right, but they're locked out of that information. They just don't have access to it. There's a lot of manipulation going on, so on and so forth. How do you, I guess the word is like, what are some common tactics you can share to help people get beyond that and maybe come to the table with a much more, being much more forthright?
So I do recommend they service themselves with resources like yours, but also a divorce coach, actually, someone else to take the lead apart from the two of them and the lawyer. The divorce coach will charge less than the lawyer, and we'll have more expertise with how to deal with them, for one.
Yeah.
When it comes to narcissism, you're essentially dealing with angry, immature, emotional processes. So if you think angry man-child in the case of a husband, or angry woman-child in the case of a woman, it's I say man-child because it's much more common. The prevalence of narcissism in men is much, much higher. And when I work with couples, it's much more common that the husband is living in grandiosity and separation, and the wife is living in emotional aloneness. But the self-image of the person matters a lot, and they care what you think about them. So until they don't, but if you're able to keep them in a place where they care what you think about them, Jamie, so they care that you see them as an honest and responsible person, so they're going to try to act honest and responsible. They do tend to try to impress others more than their own partner, and that's part of what goes wrong over the years. They'll go to a restaurant, and he wants to impress the waiter more than the wife. He wants to impress the waitress, and he's flirting with the waitress and making his wife feel small. Like it's more important to them what strangers think even than the person who's with them, because the person who's with them does see the other side of them at home. The person that generally speaking, generally they have an outside face and an inside face. They do try to hide that inside face with their partner, but essentially what we're dealing with in narcissism is a split. We have a person who is living in this reality, this version of themselves that they believe to be true, basically living in their self-image and denying everything that doesn't match their self-image as not being true. So if they see themselves as a good, generous Christian father, they're going to sort of accept all the behavior that agrees with what they see themselves as a good Christian father. And if they do something that doesn't match that behavior, they're almost able to not believe it, because they're living in this reality that they've created, and they avoid the other reality. And in this reality, there's nothing to blame here. There's nothing wrong with me. And that's part of the game that often needs to be played at the end of a relationship. If you're trying to minimize the fighting, to let them be right even if they're not. It's like, yes, I'm so sorry, I wasn't good enough for you. If you're the partner, let them be right instead of fight. I'm only leaving you because you were mean to me every single day, blah, blah, blah. That's not going to help anything. You just want to get away from this person and stop the fighting. Yes, you are leaving them now. They don't give closure, though, Jamie. That's part of what happens. They don't accept accountability. They don't accept responsibility. Part of what happens is, someone will be with their partner for 10 years and just be tired of being like the parent. It's like, it's been 10 years and they still put their dishes on top of the counter and wait for me to put them in the machine instead of just putting them in the machine. 10 years. And like, I didn't grow up with a dishwasher. It's like, you didn't learn how to use it in 10 years? Who cares if you didn't grow up with a dishwasher? Like, put a YouTube video on and figure out how to use the dishwasher.
Exactly.
But it's all these little things usually that build up. And at the end, they're just fighting about all the stupid little nothings. So to minimize the contact, we actually minimize engagement. And we use what's called the BIF method. And that's because when they're at the point of divorce, they're not living together, hopefully, at this point. They're not having the daily interactions. They're leaving for good reasons. Keeping their interactions brief, informative, friendly, and firm. Just short. Because if they really are a narcissist, then they enjoy causing reactions in others. It makes them feel special. It makes them feel important. Causing people to panic. It actually gives them some kind of emotional thing, because they're looking for validation all the time. One of the traits of narcissism is the addiction to validation. I need to be feeling good, and you need to be making me feel good. So if you're able to make your client feel good, they'll be more compliant. If you're making them feel good about themselves, they are going to be more cooperative. They tend to behave the way we are seeing them as well, because they learn to mirror others a lot. So if you treat someone like they're a super nice, friendly guy, you're more likely to get a super nice, friendly guy in return, because they really are used to mirroring the person in front of them if we're actually dealing with narcissism rather than just being authentic. If you see them as an asshole, you will probably get an asshole, because they don't care to show you the face facade then. Like, oh, right, you see me as an asshole, I'll show you, asshole. Like that. So how we treat them really, really, really makes a big difference in the case of narcissism. They're extremely sensitive to feedback that's perceived as criticism. So things need sugarcoating. They really do. And, I don't teach couples, you don't have to manage your partner. But if you're leaving your partner and you want to minimize the damage, you do have to manage that partner while you're minimizing the damage.
100%, man. So there's a lot to unpack here. And the BIF method is one that I subscribe to myself. And having actually had a chance to see Bill Eddy speak, who is the one that, like, the founding father of that method, Bill Eddy. I think it's one of the most amazing ways to do things. And one of my next questions for you was going to be around boundaries, because as you're saying this, it's like boundaries. All I'm hearing is like, we've got to set like some financial, emotional boundaries in this process. And in my own divorce, that was one of the things that I struggled with myself early on, where it was like, I was like, I just want this thing over with. And like, how do we get how do we make this like kumbaya and everybody get along and just move on? And the response back that I got back was, I'm going to make this as painful and as expensive as possible. So get ready. That was what I got back. So before I had a chance to learn more about like, the Bill Eddy approach and the BIF approach and like, working with people like you. And I'll just share this with you. One of the things that I'm a big advocate for is creating that team you, which is bringing people like you into the mix early on to get the emotional support, to work with financial planners like us to get the financial support, having a good attorney if you need one. Not everybody needs to have an attorney on the team, because 9 times out of 10, you're just going to flush a bunch of money down the toilet. That being said, most of us could not get through this experience without having an attorney to fight those legal battles. So you've got to have, you've got to have your friends and family. You've got to have all this support around you, creating Team You, in order to be able to get yourself through it. Big mistake that I made was not doing that.
Oh,
A bigger mistake that I made was not abiding by the BIF method. Being brief, being what's I forget.
Informative. Just
informative.
Like, this
right?
is the information, friendly way, firm way.
And
But
firm.
firm is the boundaries.
100%. So one of the things that I tell people now, which is a lesson that I learned, is you should never respond to a text or an email in the moment of that anger, angst, because that's what these narcissists do, right? They like, it's this diatribe, like, you're an asshole, you're this thing, you're going to make us homeless, you're going to do all these things. And like, it's like on and on and on. And I would sit there, dude, and I'd be like, oh, just want to like fire off the next email. And what I would do is I would sit there and I would draft that email and like get it off my chest, all the things that I wanted to say, and then delete it all. And delete it all and reply back with no more than 3 sentences. And it was the best thing that I ever did. So let's talk a little bit about boundaries and like how like someone can start to rebuild their confidence and like hold their ground and make firm financial decisions, even when they're emotionally drained, because that's where a lot of this comes in, right?
Yes. And, there's a lot of controversy right now about AI, but I can tell you that I am using AI to very good effect with clients.
Hell yeah.
This is one of the places I recommend using AI, because it has access to so much information. You can ask AI to take my response and you can give it instructions. You can say, here's a project. I want you to respond in a firm, concise, friendly, clear way that will not offend a narcissist. You could tell that to your AI instructions, and then you can put in your actual response that's saying how much you hate them and they're such a stupid heart and I can't believe, and you put that into AI and let it rewrite you something that's not going to offend the narcissist. Honestly, it can do that. It can do that. It can soften your words.
This is exactly ties into the emotional regulation, and you talk a lot about emotional disconnection. This is your way to be able to do that.
When you're upset, your brain is turned off. People need to recognize that. When they're feeling like this because they just got a stupid accusatory email from their partner that's just ridiculous, and they're feeling like this, their whole frontal cortex turns off if they're in fight and flight mode. So you're not thinking with your full brain. You are going to say and do things that you really don't even mean when your wise adult is awake, because your wise adult lives in the most advanced part of our brain, which is up here. And when you're in that triggered state, do not reply unless you're using a really good AI filter to fix your reply before you send it, because you have to before in 2 hours. But no, calm down, sleep on it, think about it, let yourself vent your true reply, and then say, will this help me or hurt me? Oh, okay. So if the truth is going to hurt me, then that's not what I want to do. That's not the outcome. You're not going to get closure. That's why it goes so very, very wrong, is because you do not get closure with a narcissist. They do not accept what their side was. They have a reality that will not match reality. They will be, and so that doesn't give you closure, and it gives you that feeling of wanting to get closure over and over and over. You're not going to get it from them. You're going to need to get it from a therapist or a coach or your best friend. You're not going to get closure if someone's truly narcissistic. They don't allow it. Unless you have a coach. Like, I work with narcissism. I don't consider it a fixed personality disorder. But when someone is in therapy for narcissism, they become a recovering narcissist. Just like an alcoholic becomes a recovering alcoholic. And if they stop doing the personal work, they do fall back into their narcissistic ways. They can break out of them with daily personal work and guidance to mature emotionally. Because a narcissist is emotionally immature. He's acting on processes that are me versus you. They're lacking object constancy. And what I mean by that is, when they're mad at their partner, they forget that they love their partner. And for most of us, that keeps us in what we call compassion. I'm mad at this person, but I love them and they love me. Therefore, I'm not going to attack them. That's object constancy. That doesn't exist if they're really a narcissist. When they're mad, all they are aware of is anger. And they will launch into a mean attack, and they think you deserve it. Or they've learned not to launch in a mean attack, and they go into quiet, cold distance where they're vengeful and contemptful, and you feel the cold distance, but they're pretending, oh no, everything's fine, I'm fine over here. But meanwhile, they're plotting your death, like you can feel the cold. So they'll either be overtly abusive, or they'll be passive aggressively abusive, building up a case against you, that kind of thing. So that's what we're managing.
And how do you handle that in those therapy sessions that you have, right? Like, because you work with a lot of couples who are deciding whether to stay, whether to go, like dealing with all this stuff. And I'm presuming, I guess let's answer this from both a psychological and a financial perspective, right? Like how do you like practically work through this with couples that are from a psychological perspective, but also like encouraged to explore like how to handle the financial aspects in these cases that are super high conflict?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, couples come to me before they're ready to break up, or they're right at the edge. Sometimes they're like, we were going to break up and we decided we'd try couples therapy. That's quite often when they come in. I watched the interactions of what's happening in front of me, and I can recognize narcissistic patterns pretty quickly. I'll call it out. And what happens that's different with me and other therapists when it comes to someone who is experiencing narcissism is I understand it in a deep enough way that I start by guessing what's happening for them, because they're not sharing what's happening for them. They're just playing the game as they think. And so I will start guessing, are you thinking this right now? Are you feeling this right now? When she said this, did you think this? And they're like, oh, well, yes. And when she said that, did this happen? So I have to be guessing the narcissistic processes that are going on for them and not judging them at all, and recognizing where they're coming from and how that reaction is happening. And when I start guessing what's happening inside them, that's when they start sharing what's happening inside them. Because essentially narcissism is living all off in separation by itself, and that's why it leaves reality. It's like an angry child, and no one's in their inner circle with that anger, and they never let them in over there. So when I'm able to get into that inner circle with them, that's when that inner circle is able to expand. Over time, they develop the ability to deal with difficult emotions, which they just do not want to deal with. They avoid so many things that if they go anywhere near it, they have an explosive reaction, because they're avoiding so many things. This is actually toxic positivity. Even toxic positivity can cause narcissism. If you're avoiding all negative things to be positive all the time, it doesn't work. It does not work. If you are not letting yourself go to grief, if you are denying that you feel anger when you feel anger, if you are just desensitizing your body and you become numb, and it just doesn't work. And then you're also not feeling with the emotions of the other. If you don't go to sadness and your partner comes to you sad, the dog died, and you're not allowing yourself to go to sadness, your partner's alone in that sadness, and they will feel alone, and they're going to feel abandonment, and they're going to feel neglect, and they're going to even feel rejection by the inability to feel with them in those difficult emotions. I'm seeing that a lot. That's what I see mostly in couples, is the guy has been taught not to feel, and that's common in our society, and it's coming from past generations of trauma.
Is John Wayne syndrome?
John Wayne syndrome. Yeah, maybe
John Wayne
so.
syndrome, right? I mean, like I've heard other guests on the show, and even in person, like I've talked to people about this, and like, it's that John Wayne syndrome. Like I've got it all handled, and like, get off my lawn, like, I've got it all taken care of, and it's just not practical.
You have a nervous system. Men and women and everyone, doesn't matter what you experience your gender as, you have a nervous system. You feel all the feelings, but men have been taught to hold it back and to not feel it and to be strong anyway. Well, to be brave is to feel fear and do it anyway. That is to be brave, but it's not to not feel fear. We feel the fear, and then we accept the fear, and we acknowledge that we're afraid, and then we step up and we do the thing. But if we force ourselves to not feel fear, the unfortunate thing is you cannot selectively decide which emotions you can not feel. You end up desensitizing yourself to yourself, and you end up feeling empty. And you end up feeling empty in a way that you're trying to always feel better, always feel happy, and you can't quite ever feel happy. You're chasing it by buying a bigger house and a bigger car and a bigger this, and I'll feel happy when this happens, and I'll feel happy when I get married, and I'll feel happy when I have kids, and then I'm going to feel happy when we get a bigger house. And they never feel happy. Yeah, if you've desensitized your body, this is where all your emotions are coming from. So you can't ignore some of them. Some people have had a major trauma, and they've cut themselves off emotionally, and they're also not happy. They do things that foster feeling in that happy energy, but it's shallow, it's baseless, but they're constantly chasing happy in that case.
It's crazy, man. There's so many different things that go on through divorce. So we've talked a lot about. We could do a whole show. We haven't even talked about like kids and how they're involved. I mean, we could do a whole other show on this. But let's talk a little bit about sticking with the couples here. We've talked a lot about like leading up to divorce and preparing for divorce, and like how couples come to you and they sort that out, and they talk to you about how they're going to proceed. Talked about going through divorce and some of the factors that we see as the divorce is unfolding. One of these days, the divorce is going to be over, and that person has to go on. They have to be able to heal. They have to remain, financially and emotionally intact, right? So, like, how do you do all that when you're leaving a controlling and toxic relationship? What are some of the things that you coach your clients on once the dust is settled?
So staying off the battlefield is one. Don't get pulled into anything. Boundaries. Oh my goodness. Of course, it's more complicated when you're sharing children, because the boundaries have to be so much different because you're sharing children, you're co-parenting.
Yeah.
If you're co-parenting, you kind of need really, really clear boundaries, and you need to be parallel parenting almost, and rather than co-parenting, because it can be very difficult to have agreement. So you're just making the best of a bad situation. Document everything. That's important so that it doesn't get twisted. Like, don't delete the texts. If you don't want them on your phone, keep them in some kind of other way. Don't delete the emails. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really important to document things, because they will use half-truths against you. They may get mad at you later if it might be an amicable divorce, but then they see you with a new partner and all of a sudden they're enraged and they decide to come back and attack. Make sure you're ready for that. I've been attacked. I've had little random attacks. I have an ex who shows up every few years online as a different fake person to attack me or attack my partner in an emotional sort of way. And it's just these weird random attacks that come on through social media. And it takes me a little while to realize, like, oh my gosh, I know this is you again. Jeepers. Are you still there? And it's like every time they have another breakup, they coming back and attack the ex. You got to just be ready for that and not take it personally. It's nothing about you. If someone's being an asshole to you, it's about them. They are the jerk, not you. That's what goes wrong in these relationships too, because the partner is blamed for all the, if someone's narcissistic, they feel like how they feel is your fault. So they come in the house and you're having a bad day. They may actually make it into a fight because suddenly they're not feeling great and they're angry that you're having a bad day. And it's like, what's wrong with you? And like, oh, I had a really hard day. Oh, you think you had a hard day? And then all of a sudden you're fighting and you're like, where did that fight come from? You don't even know where it came from.
Yeah.
So you have to protect against things like that. My ADHD came up and it just sort of, the train went off the rails. It does that.
I actually dealt with a scenario like I'll just share personally, right? So we're filming this in the early part of June. It's graduation time. Had a graduation last night, and we finally have now get to the point where like the family can all come together and so on and so forth, and it was very amicable, and we had a great time and got to celebrate my son graduating and the whole thing. And Grandpa still can't let go of the anger in this particular, and like it's like this anger just seeps through the whole family, right? Like when you're going through a divorce. So you've got to like be careful of that, because some of these boundaries that you're talking about setting up, like had there been better boundaries in my own situation, maybe like that anger wouldn't have been able to seep through these other layers of the family. Like the son of a bitch wouldn't even shake my hand last night. I'm like, we've been divorced 8 years, right? So it's like, and it's bothersome. Right. I'm like, wow, this is like, and I don't have anything against the guy. I think he's a great guy. He was always amazing to me, but it's like all these things, like, it's just like, it's now, and it's hard to unwind that, because these family members are like, I don't even know how to describe this. I don't even really know where I'm going. Maybe my ADHD is kicking in with this. I don't even know if I have it, but maybe I do. But, I'm thinking through like, you're talking about like these boundaries and like how like it's so hard to heal and all these things. And I'm like, I watched my family last night, like my ex-wife, and everybody hugged, and she even she's hugging my now wife because I'm since remarried, and the kids are all getting along and this other stuff. And then I'm watching like the next layer, like her stepfather, still is not over this thing, and it's been like 8 years. It's like, what the hell, dude?
Forgiveness is a relationship skill. It's an emotional process that's a higher level emotional process, and he doesn't recognize that when he is feeling those ugly feelings, he is the one that's feeling that negative energy in his body. It's not you. He's feeling anger and you nasty person. He's the one that's in that negative energy. He's the one that's drowning in that. That's why forgiveness is important. It's not for the person over there. It's because he's producing cortisol. He's more likely to get cancer. He's more likely to have a heart attack when you're harboring those resentments and those angers. We learn to give those things up and accept that other people are flawed and not perfect and that things go wrong, and we let those go. But yeah, he's just living in that ugly state when it comes to this, not letting it go.
Probably because he's been unhappily married for 25 years, but who will? I mean, that could also
the generation
be it.
Before too. I mean, it became a bad pattern because honestly, I tell couples who are deciding whether or not to stay, the way you treat your wife, is that how you would like your daughter to be treated later? The way you're treating your wife now, because that is the pattern she will follow. Your daughter is very likely to have a pattern who's going to treat her the way you are treating your wife. Are you proud of how you treat your wife? Are you, do you feel good about the interactions between you? If you don't, you should be divorcing, because those are the patterns you are giving them. If you can't get along.
This is an amazing point, because I say this all the time. Like the relationship I have with my now wife compared to the relationship I have with my ex-wife, it's obvious there's a difference, right? And the kids see it. And that was my biggest thing when I decided I wanted a divorce. I was like, I don't want my kids to ever have to feel the way that I feel.
Right.
Right. I want them to recognize that, like, there is a land of happiness out there. This may not be it for me right now, and this is going to hurt. It's going to be very bumpy, and it certainly was. But I think, like as they're getting older, they're recognizing that, I've taken myself out of that narcissistic relationship. I've been able to grow, personally, professionally, and all these things. I've become a better dad, I think. And, I try to be very pragmatic and practical and like the steady ship. Like, the kid, you can hate me, you can not like the way that I'm parenting you, you can do all these things, but I'm going to be slow and steady. Right. And I think even last night in this experience, the first thing I thought of was, you don't have to shake my hand, but you damn well better respect me in front of my kids, because I would never disrespect you in front of I would never disrespect you in front of them.
Yeah. So you had that boundary.
So you know what I'm saying? So I guess, and we're all talking about my personal situation. It's like, this is not about me, but I'm hoping it's a lesson to people that are listening. Like, you can set boundaries with people that, like, it doesn't have to be with just your ex-wife or your ex-husband or your ex-partner. Like, it can go the next layer. Like, you've got to start. And I thought I didn't think there was a reason for those boundaries being in place. Apparently they still are. So, but I think the message here really is if you can focus on the kids and focus on yourself and just try to be that steady ship in the night, things will all work themselves out. Because I'm seeing it firsthand. Like, the kids are amazing, and they're we have a great relationship, and we text each other, call each other, all the stuff. Right. But it took a long time to get there because of some of the things that were going on behind these, and they were growing. I mean, they're just young kids. They were feeling all the feels about the divorce themselves.
Well, part of the narcissism epidemic we are watching is truly because couples stayed together who hated each other too much. That is part of what went wrong. You shouldn't begrudge each other every day and still stay together. Yeah. The patterns that is passing along are disconnected, right? A narcissist is living in me versus you. They feel like others are against them, so I'm against you too. If that's what you're watching in your parents because they never get along, yeah, it will create narcissistic ways of being for the next generation. Naturally would. We learn how to treat each other. Our brains are developing. We're born unfinished. We come into the world, our brain is still developing until we're 27. It's still developing a lot until we're 17, but it's still developing really, really fast until we're 13. So, you can pick up a language quite easily if you start before 13, because your brain is laying down so many pathways. So all those things that happen before you're 13, the way your parents are acting together, that becomes how you see parents are acting together, and you don't even know it's anything different than others. They might learn it's dysfunctional because they see TV. And they see, maybe families on TV that are getting along, but they also may think, oh, that's fantasy. That's not how real people live. Real people fight every day. There are lots of people who think that, honestly. And people come into therapy and you say, how was your childhood? It's almost always, oh, it was okay. It was average. But if they're coming in for therapy, very often that's not actually, when we dig into it, it was normal for you because you grew up with it. But wow. Yeah. And that's a lot of the therapy is just being seen in your actual experience by someone who's witnessing what happened for you. And in the case of narcissism, there's often a lot of disconnection and a lot of trauma. that really got stored up, that they have developed like two versions of themselves, the nice version and this nasty version they get triggered into. And this version really is like an angry child, and the wise adult needs to grow. And you're talking about your wise adult taking over, go to this function, and you're like, whoa, look at all this going on, jeepers. That's your wise adult ruling, and we're meant to have our wise adult be ruling. We have different parts of ourselves. Your angry child might get triggered sometimes, but your wise adult's the one that's supposed to take the driving seat. When it's a narcissist, they forget about the wise adult. That's the thing. Like that father-in-law, he forgets his wise adult. The wise adult disappears. He goes into anger. And that's just angry child, like, oh, nasty man, nasty. And that's polarized too, right? Seeing you good or bad, right? Not all the shades of gray that Jamie actually is, but is bad, good. Like, that's very narcissistic. And that's childish. And all children are narcissistic. That's where the word was used. It was used by Freud to describe children's processes. How, the world does revolve around us. We do think that people are there to fill our needs. We do not have object constancy. We do forget that mommy's the one we love. And we like, I hate you, mommy. You're bad. That's real. That's normal for kids to do that. They shouldn't even be punished for it because they do lack object constancy. But that's when we teach them object constancy. It's not a punishable. It's a teachable. It's saying, mommy loves you, and I know you're angry right now, but we teach them object constancy. If they didn't get taught that, if they were just said, go to your room until you're calm, they might not learn object constancy, actually. And that's a lot of parenting we've been taught came from traumatized people. If you can imagine people coming back from war, granddad came back from war, traumatized, but we didn't know what trauma was 50 years ago or 70 years ago. And those processes of getting upset and triggered and avoiding emotions, that was grandpa for a lot of people. And he would have been abusive to his wife, and he would have been detached from his kids, and he may have drank too much alcohol, or he tried to be good, always trying to be good, trying to be happy to avoid the trauma. And then, making the kids always be happy. And if the kids come with something serious or bad, or it's like, oh, grow up and be a man. I'm a man. And that essentially, complex post-trauma stress disorder is essentially being passed to the next generation as if that's parenting. And that did happen. That happened a lot. Keep calm and carry on was not meant for every day. It was just meant for wartime. And we took it on. We took it on as a way of being. And now we can see it sort of playing out in a big mess.
It really is a big mess all the way around. And I'd love to have you back and talk more about some of this stuff because I think it's incredibly important. The message is incredibly insightful and really just a unique perspective on some of the emotional and financial fallout that we see in high conflict divorces. So Darren, thanks so much, man, for being on the show today. For anyone that is dealing with the complexities of a toxic relationship, I really, really encourage you to check out more of Darren's work on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, explore some of the remote therapy options that he has available through his practice. And as always, if you need financial guidance or clarity or any support from the financial side of your divorce, you can head over to allegiantds.com to learn more about how our team can help and book a complimentary and confidential call there. Don't forget to subscribe to more episodes of Broke Up, Not Broke In like this, and for more expert advice on empowering conversations. Until next time.